City Hall, City Council Chambers at 209 Lemonwood Drive in Castle Hills, Texas. It's 7 p.m. We have a quorum in attendance tonight. The commissioners who were seated for this evening's session are Mr. Aiken, Ms. Baker, Mr. Gray, Mr. Flynn, and Chairman Isbrand. I'd like to deviate from the agenda for just a minute. We are privileged tonight to have with us some representatives from the Boy Scouts Troop 515. And if you would all be kind enough to join with me, we're going to ask them to come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. So, gentlemen, would you come up to the microphone here and lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We're thrilled to have you with us tonight. All right, item 2 on the agenda is to consider approval of the February 6, 2018 zoning meeting minutes. Commissioners, if you'll indulge me, I've asked Ms. Thielen to, if they could go back to these and add in a little bit more detail regarding the discussion that took place during that meeting so that we were able to appropriately memorialize this, both in terms of the record of the activity that we took and for historical purposes. So if there's no objection, we'll ask for those to come back next time around. All right, thank you very much. Item number 3 is consider and make a recommendation to the City Council to eliminate the word existing from section 50-497A5 of the zoning code, which currently states A5. Day nurseries, preschools, or kindergartens in conjunction with an existing public, private, or denominational school having a curriculum equivalent to grades 1 through 12 of a public school to allow a SUP for day nurseries, preschools, or kindergarten in conjunction with a public, private, or denominational school having a curriculum equivalent to grades 1 through 12 of a public school. In just a minute, we'll open up a public hearing on this. Let me first ask Ms. Thielen, can you give us the context of why this item is before the commission tonight, please?
Yes, sir. If the word existing remains in there, then no other school will be able to go into that facility and have a pre-K or kindergarten because there is not an existing one there at this time. So they would have to open first through grades 1 through 12, and then if at a later time they wanted to add a pre-K or a kindergarten, they could do so. But kindergarten's become extremely mainstream, and pre-K has become extremely mainstream, and we know that it prepares children. So there's the likelihood of someone being able to use the facility, including the ladies that are here this evening, to start a program without pre-K or preschool is virtually impossible. I mean, it's just probably not going to happen. And so by removing that word existing, then you allow them the ability to do that. And I know that the word existing was placed in there not too long ago because of concerns that if it was not in there, that you would see pre-Ks and preschools pop up in residential neighborhoods. But I believe the SUP process itself provides enough protections to be able to allow anyone who wanted to do such a thing to have to come before this particular commission. And at that time, you could vet for those issues that would cause neighborhood concerns. And if they were identified, you could turn down that SUP at that time.
Okay. And this item was added specifically to address the item next, or is there any other consideration that we need to be aware of?
There are no other active inquiries regarding this. It is purely for this existing SUP. Yes,
okay,
sir.
Thank you. All right, before we open the public hearing, do any of the commission members have any questions of Ms. Thielen or any comments at this point? Yes, sir, of course, Mr. Aiken.
Okay, so I want you to clarify because I know we added this, I think, 2 meetings ago, and we added it specifically so that if a new non-existing school came in, they would have to come before us. And we were struggling with the wording, and we came up to add the word existing. So I guess I'm just losing sight now on why we added it to start with, and now why we need to take it out, and why, if we don't take it out, why it's so difficult for this group to come here, because we talked about this for at least 15 minutes 2 meetings ago, so now I'm totally confused.
I think we had a lot of raw emotion at that meeting simply because we'd been through the basis school and there was a lot of concerns about neighborhood infiltration and traffic, and I think we've seen that that has been mitigated very well, and we're
But
not.
back up. Adding the word existing had nothing to do with traffic flow or emotions. I think we were simply trying to figure out a way to have a new school come before the council.
It was for
So-
the Christian school that's been in existence, but when they split from the Baptist church and became their own entity, they didn't have any legal way to have a preschool or a kindergarten, and so that was why that language was put in, because the next part of that was just like this. It was a two-piece hearing. Second piece was for the Christian school to be able to
Okay,
continue
so we
their
added the word
existing.
existing to say, hey, if you're not an existing school, you need to come before here. What I can't figure out then is with the group we have before us, why is it so difficult for them if the word existing is in here? You said something a minute ago when you were explaining it that went way over my head.
If they opened today, if they planned and went ahead and leased, and in the fall opened a first grade, second grade, third, all the way to 12, the way it's written now, they could not open a kindergarten or a preschool at that time. They would have to establish their school, and then at a later date, come and ask for the SUP to add the pre-K and the kindergarten. I don't know why the code's written that way, and when we went back, the existing word was put in there, and it wasn't for you guys as much as it was for the people in attendance that were very concerned about integrity of the neighborhoods.
I'm still not getting there. I guess I'm just not that smart. So you're telling me if the school comes in and we still have the word existing, they can't add, because they are then an existing school. So why should this paragraph then preclude them from opening up? I'm just losing you here.
It's in two pieces in the, so let's see if
I mean, are you guys on board?
Well,
I'm just losing sight of what.
we'll have the discussion of this after we have the public hearing, but I wanted to at least give you the opportunity to put your questions or to begin to frame the discussion that we will have here.
I'm just having trouble understanding why this word is so difficult and why it makes what these ladies are doing problematic.
Chairman, do you want me to address that now, or do you want to open your public hearing first?
Why don't you answer Mr. Aiken's question now? We'll see if there's any other initial comments, and then I'd like to get to the public hearing.
In Chapter 50, Section 50-61, which is a single-family residential, in B, it says municipally owned buildings and structures, these are what are allowed in use regulations. In addition to the following uses are allowed if special use permit is approved by City Council in accordance with this chapter. And number 1 is non-commercial public parks, playgrounds, and athletic fields, and public, private, or denominational schools having a curriculum equivalent to 1 through 12 of a public school. It does not allow for the kindergarten or pre-K. And you're correct, back in September, we addressed this, and the change was, and that existing word was actually added after a lot of conversations, and it says that any district, the following uses may be requested for designation as a special use, and number 5 is day nurseries, preschools, or kindergartens in conjunction with an existing public, private, or denominational school having a curriculum grades 1 through 12 of a public school. They don't exist, so they can't open with the pre-K and the kindergarten because they don't exist already.
So when we go through the SUP process, can't we just allow that at that point in time? Or we can't do that?
You can't make a change to the code for the SUP. You have to change the code and then issue the SUP.
So why don't we leave the word existing in and change the code to allow for kindergarten through 12 as opposed to grade 1 through 12?
but it's not an existing school at that particular building either. So, I mean, while we're having the discussion, I might as well weigh in here. I think.
Oh, please.
No, I know where your concern is, and we put it in there specifically in response to the other school. And I think the concern at that time was that we didn't want, because of drainage issues there, everything like that, we wanted to make sure, preclude any kind of additional expansion of the footprint or any building or anything like that. If I recall correctly, that was the intent of that wording. So, I think we should leave the existing in there for that reason, because I hate to, it doesn't make sense that every time we have a meeting, we just change willy-nilly. I think we can keep the existing in there and just say, revise the text to say public, private, or not, or denominational school or equivalent, or something like that, or building, to make sure that we're looking at the structure itself and not additional building. And I would also say that even if we got rid of existing, we're still calling for public, private, or denominational school having a curriculum equivalent to grades 1 through 12. So even if we got rid of that text, we would still not be able to include a pre-K and kindergarten. So I'm going to suggest that text would need to be revised as well, so we could say pre-K through grade 12. I mean, if we're making changes, and I think the intent was good, and it was to reduce the footprint, I think we ought to keep that. But I think we can refine it a little bit to be a little more precise in the language.
When we looked at this before, we had the code in front of us. All we have now is a paragraph, so I really can't make heads or tails of it. And I know you're reading it to me, and I appreciate that, but I'm just not seeing the picture.
Okay.
I would like to clarify something. I believe that this change and the current ordinance relate to residential, Zone A. Is that correct?
This is purely because of its A, residential zoning.
If we are changing anything now, we would be changing it for every residential neighborhood, which I'm opposed to. We put it in there for a reason, and it was to protect the integrity of the residential neighborhoods. So I'm opposed to taking it out. I'm opposed to allowing daycare centers in residential areas, because the proliferation of that would mean anybody, and I love your school, anybody could open up a daycare center in a residential area. And I think that's the whole purpose, that we used the language that we did and we made it as restricted as we did.
But not without an SUP.
Right. I mean, you can still get an SUP, but you can't do it in a residential neighborhood unless you're an existing school. There was a reason it was in there, to prevent the proliferation of commercial entities into residential neighborhoods. That's the consensus of almost everybody in Castle Hills. They want to keep the integrity of their residential areas intact.
Okay, Mr. Gray, I'll give you an opportunity here too before the public hearing. Is there anything you wanted to put on the table?
Not at this point.
All right.
You've covered it all.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's 7:15. We are going to open the public hearing on this matter. Ms. Thielen, did we have individuals sign up to speak to this?
Yes, sir.
If you didn't sign up and would like to, you're more than welcome, but let us first go through the protocol of anyone who signed up. While we're waiting, if anyone happens to find an iPhone on the floor, if you'd let me know, I'd appreciate it. Surely it's somewhere in this building, I believe.
And I want to wish Wayne a happy birthday. Just so you know, there are cupcakes back there celebrating his birthday. Wayne Carter.
All right, so this is item number 3. Dr. Ackley.
Stephen Ackley, 118 West Castle Lane. I was at these previous hearings, and I think most of you know that we were very involved in the arguments over the basis school and its placement. That said, I think that the intent of the ordinance is, as Jenna put it, to prevent the proliferation of daycare into the neighborhoods. However, in this particular case, we're dealing with an already existing facility that's set up for school. And there is an important SUP process that has to be gone through for any of these arguments. And I'd like to refer to 2 cases that were put out for the Lemonwood area here, where I think there's an agreement now, or at least there's a protocol, that you have to have traffic impact in those neighborhoods. So a daycare center that wanted to go into there was not allowed to because of the traffic impact. And similarly, it was turned down because of the church that, the Iglesia church that wanted to buy on that property as well, as that would impact on that. So my own feeling is that there is sufficient protection within the neighborhoods now that we didn't possibly have before. The basis case was a very unique one because of its ability to circumvent any zoning on it. Right now, we're in a case where we do have sufficient zoning protection for anybody but a charter school, apparently. So I think we can say that we can change this if this particular school is going in there, and it's going to have about 1/10 the impact of the basis school that's already in there. And I think it's a good use for that particular property. And as a neighbor in that particular area, I think if it's just one word in the code that would prevent them from going into there, I think that would be a major travesty. I don't think that this is what the intent of the code, change in the code was. It was, as Janet pointed out, to protect the proliferation of daycare centers into that area. So I personally feel that we have demonstrated that we have those protections within Castle Hills now, and that if this particular niggling point prevented a school from occupying what will be an empty space, a quite large empty space, there's 800, 900 students in there, and they're talking about putting in maybe 100. I don't think that that's fair either, and that would represent a good use of that particular property. So I think that you ought to really consider the implication of this, and that we shouldn't put our, try to preclude any use of existing properties as this one here is. And if a school comes in here and wanted to buy up, or daycare wanted to buy up residential properties, I think the zoning protections are pretty sufficient now to prevent those if they have an undue impact. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Ackley. Charles Matt, Mr. Matt.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here in support of the French School of San Antonio, and on this particular issue, I would simply respectfully ask that it be resolved expeditiously in order to allow the school to move forward with planning for the fall. If they are delayed much longer, it will cause a burden to invite potential students and parents to participate in this school. It will be a significant burden if that is delayed. So I simply respectfully ask that this be given all due attention and handled expeditiously.
Thank you, Mr. Matt. Those are the only individuals I have who signed up for this item. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this before we close the public session? Ms. Fernandez?
Thank you. I just wanted to make the suggestion that maybe instead of removing existing, which would open up a daycare to pop into an existing home next door to other residential uses, which I think was the intention when you added that word, that maybe we add an exception or an alternative standard to the end of the proposed phrase that says something like, or located in an existing commercial facility located in a residentially zoned area, something that carves out that we've got an existing school-type facility in this case that makes sense for this purpose, but we're not changing the entire code to permit daycares to pop up in between residential homes.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who would like to speak to this item? Sarah, did you want to speak?
I'm Peter Bell of 110 Hibiscus, and I was just going to say what Blakely said. I think she's right. No, all kidding aside, I think that it is both ironic to know that it was about a year ago that the city did reach an agreement with Basis, and here we are again at the point where we're interested in a discussion on a school coming to the same property. But among the critical elements, such as what the zoning says, the zoning requirements say, this word existing, I think would be really unfortunate if this were to fall because we were not able to find a way to accommodate the existing language and the intent of the language especially. So I agree with the earlier speakers who had talked in terms of hoping that we can find a way to make this work. I'm looking forward to seeing that school become part of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bellin. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item? All right, it is 7:24 p.m. We'll close the public hearing and reconvene as the commission, and we'll open the floor back up for further discussion. Mr. Aiken, did you have any additional questions, comments that you would like to put out there? We'll give each of you the opportunity.
It's like a can of worms. Yeah, I'm open to whatever we can come up with. I don't know that I want to take out the word existing, but I think the young lady that spoke, and I'm sorry I didn't get your name, that said maybe we can add in an existing commercial facility or something like that. If we can do that, I'm for that. But I'm not sure I have an exact proposal to make.
Okay. Other comments?
That's in conjunction with my comment as well. And I think it's just a matter of phraseology. I think we should keep the existing in there because it does give us more protection. But I think it's a simple matter to rephrase the text to be a little more inclusive. And so I'm all for that.
I also think that unfortunately might be an issue that we have to take up at another time, because I would like to see the language, and that's not what's being proposed tonight. It's only the removal of existing. So I think we need to see the entirety of the text that we would be adding or replacing and removing before we vote on it, because that's not what our charge is tonight. And I know it's in the interest of time to do it quickly, but that's not what we're presented with tonight. And I would not want to encourage us to make a decision snap tonight on language that we're just now working through. I'd like for Blakely to write it out for us, and we could have Janet and our city attorney look at it. And I'd like to know the pitfalls of adding this language before we add this language. And I would oppose taking out existing for exactly what's been discussed, is that I think we do need to protect our neighborhoods. And I'm not opposed to this particular applicant. I am just opposed to removing existing and allowing other daycares and entities to creep into the neighborhoods. That's why this is in here.
Mr. Gray, comment?
If we do what you're recommending, does that prevent us from going to the next item and approving it?
It would be my interpretation of this agenda that if we are to recommend leaving the ordinance as it currently exists, it would preclude us from addressing the next item, which specifically states an SUP for preschool, kindergarten, which would be the two at issue, and elementary school.
I think you have a couple of options. If the intent is for a recommendation to City Council, you could recommend that language be vetted prior to their meeting, or you could dismiss this evening and reconvene another time this week. As long as you state the time and the date, you're fine, as long as it is ready before Friday for the council agenda for next Tuesday. But if you don't want to rush that, then they could have a special meeting when their second workshop, when they have their workshop for the second portion of May. They could hold a special meeting to address this then. So there's some timing flexibility. We just would need to establish the next date that this group would reconvene. And that way we do not have to do publication or any other additional other than what we would put on our website and post here at the building.
I just want to make sure that we're not coming across, I totally agree, Jen, with what you're saying, but I don't want us to appear to be unfriendly and bureaucratic when possibly this is something we could move forward. So if you're saying we can make a recommendation to City Council that we want that wording in there vetted and approved, then we can also still make a recommendation on the SUP, understanding that that wording is vetted and approved by City Council. Are we allowed to do that?
I am inclined to follow the agenda for this meeting, which specifically says to make a recommendation to eliminate the word existing. So I would expect that we will vote up or down on that, and based on that would move on.
If you take a final vote on it, I don't believe you'll be able to bring it back without us doing publication because it'll be a new item. It can be postponed and dealt with at a later time. You can continue with the meeting, hear the rest of it, so you have all that information to absorb and address all of it at a second meeting, as long as we establish that date and time of that meeting.
I propose that we suggest a second meeting, but I would like to think that we had ample time, because I would prefer not to get the proposed language, the day before we meet.
Right.
I think we have adequate time to give you a couple of weeks for that language to be put together, sent out to you, absorbed, and set a meeting date prior to that next City Council meeting, so that the next workshop, and we could hold a special with it.
Mr. Gray, did you have any other comments at this point?
It just kind of bothers me that we can't move forward because of this, when it's a semantics issue, which we need legal protection, and I get that. I don't like the fact that we have one that withholds the other as we're trying to move forward. So I'm not sure how we resolve that.
Sure. So I'd like to make a couple comments. It's a little bit problematic to me that because a single applicant comes to the city and asks for something, that we would put before the commission a proposal to change a portion of an ordinance. I don't think that's the way that it should be done. And Mr. Flynn, I seem to recall you, with all due respect, and I mean that sincerely, admonishing us before when we've had issues like this about it wasn't spot zoning, but it was spot changing zoning. And that's troublesome to me. And each of you knows just how much time has been invested by this commission and by the committee that was formed to review the zoning ordinance for this city. And we are months and months and months into this process and have not yet concluded it because of the detail by which it needs to be considered. So when we treat the rest of an ordinance that seriously or with that, level of granularity, but, until last week, we don't even know this is coming to us, and we're being asked to change an ordinance of the city or make a recommendation to the council, I should say, to change the ordinance. I think that's something that should be done judiciously. And I don't see, in coming here tonight, Mr. Gray, I kind of had to exercise in my mind my personal view between item 3 and item 4, because I don't think one should be looked at, that they should be looked at as the same. If we believe that the word existing should be removed from this, when are we going to come back? How many more meetings will we come back before we decide to add it again? Because that's the cycle that we're getting ourselves into. That what we do with the ordinance or a recommendation on the ordinance goes beyond one singular application that we have. And I would just caution us, I appreciate what everyone is attempting to do tonight, but I would caution us of, if we are to treat seriously our responsibility to make a recommendation to the council on our zoning ordinance as a whole or one section of it, that we have given it the due consideration that it deserves for its impact going into the future, not just in addressing one applicant's request tonight or next month or whatever the case may be.
I think your point is well taken. I mean, the issue you referred to earlier was with the Westwood property, but I think Jana's point is very valid too. We put existing in there as a kind of compromise to keep things moving, and here we are a few months later revisiting the issue. So for consistency and, like I say, we don't want to be putting ourselves in the place of making law and making ordinances. So I would agree with Jana's approach that we should come up with some language and, submit to council for approval, and then we would go forward from there.
Are there other comments before we call for a motion?
Well, I'll make a short comment. I think we should go ahead and vote on agenda item 3, and then we move on to agenda item 4. And I look at them separately, and if we decide to say yay on agenda item 4, then I think it's up to the city to figure out how to handle it. But I agree. I don't think I think we know how we're going to vote on item 3.
Would you like to run this question by Mr. Brennan? He did say he was available by phone.
No, I think we've had the discussion that we need to. So the floor is open to a motion. Ms. Baker?
I move that we make a recommendation to deny the request to remove the word existing from zoning code section 50497A5. Do you want me to read the entirety of it? Or I move that we deny it.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second to the motion? Second from Mr. Flynn. Is there further discussion on this item? All right, hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor of the motion, please indicate by raising your hand. All right, the motion is 5-0. We will recommend to City Council that this section 50-497A5 remain as currently written. Item 4, based on the action of the commission tonight and its expression of an intent to leave the ordinance, this section of the ordinance as it currently exists until a future date, I don't believe that we are eligible to hear this application as it pertains to an SUP for preschool, kindergarten, and elementary school as the agenda item is written. So it is, so I will determine that we will table that item. It is my intention that we would next take up this matter at our next regularly scheduled meeting that will give ample time for any proposed language to be brought forward, and equally ample time to ensure that any members of the public who want to participate in this process have the chance to do so, that this isn't something that pops up a week from now or 2 weeks from now or whatever, that we have given ample time to the community to be a participant in this process. Are there any other comments before we adjourn the meeting?
I think we need to set an action item as to who's going to do the draft and what the process is and how it's going to come back to us. I mean, right now, it's just up in the air, you know, and if someone's not appointed, you know, I thought you were going to do it. I thought you were going to do it.
All right.
Doesn't get done.
Ms. Thalen, if we can ask you to carry our word forward to the city attorney, we would request his guidance in the drafting of the appropriate language that would address this, to the direction given by the commissioners tonight.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's participation. I'm sorry that we are unable to get to the French school application tonight. We look forward to the opportunity to address it at its appropriate time. It is 7:38 p.m. and we are adjourned. Thank you for being here.